Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of In Range. You may have noticed that the logo on the title screen for this video was a little different. It had a bunch of binary at the bottom, and there's a reason for that. This is going to be a technical discussion. I strongly believe that if you are an adherent of your firearms rights and personal liberty in that regard, you need to be just as concerned, if not more so, in regards to our digital rights. And inevitably, these two worlds are going to converge, and it's going to be something that if you don't understand both, you're going to be left behind. So, that said, there was some stuff that happened recently, which I think is worth discussing. And Secure Boot was designed to ostensibly provide the user with a higher level of security on a system that supported it. What this did is it had a cryptographic check and balance in which it would check to make sure that the operating system booting and the files booting on your system were signed by Redmond, by Microsoft. So the idea behind that was that if something wasn't signed, the secure boot would fail because your machine was no longer secure. So let's say your machine was compromised and someone replaced some of the boot files on your operating system. Well, those would not be signed by a certificate provided by Redmond, and therefore the system would fail in its boot, and you should be avoiding a security incident. That was the justification for UEFI Secure Boot. The real reason, if you ask me, is that they wanted to lock you into a proprietary operating system. If you bought some hardware, probably one of the Surface tablets, for example, or a Windows phone, a lot of motherboards and regular computers allow you to disable secure boot, at least at this point, but a lot of stuff don't as well. That if you could not turn off secure boot, you were stuck with a Microsoft provided cryptographically signed operating system. You could not repurpose that hardware with Linux or some other thing. Well, Microsoft maintained the cryptographic keys for UEFI Secure Boot, and they recently accidentally disclosed them. Well, what that means is UEFI Secure Boot just went from secure to gone. These keys are now in the wild, and those backdoor cryptographic keys allow you to break out of the sandbox that required you to use a secure boot signed operating system on the hardware that would not allow you to do otherwise. Well, this is a good thing. This means that people that had hardware that was locked into a proprietary operating system no longer are. Well, cool. That's great. Fine. We've broken out of a proprietary sandbox. But what it also is a lesson about why, if you believe in your digital rights and your firearms rights, which we're going to get to in a minute, you need to control the technology that secures your world. Because if there's a backdoor or an additional decryption key, or someone else maintains what I'm going to go ahead and just say is a skeleton key for the encryption that protects your data or your operating system, it's inevitably going to get out. If there's a backdoor or an exposed API, it probably has a vulnerability in it. Someone from external attack can hack into it, breach into it. It doesn't have to be at the nation state level, but it very well could be. If Microsoft retains the skeleton keys for your encryption solution, whether it's for your data in transit or your data in storage, or whether or not your operating system can boot, well, they can accidentally leak them. Or they could give them to the government to get into your operating system or your data because they're the ones that have the keys. And let's say they get a warrant for to do that on the back end that you don't even know about, which has been going on, right? So if that's the case, if you don't maintain those keys and those keys aren't in only your possession, the cryptographic security and privacy of your data, if you believe that encryption is supposed to provide it, is breached and not trustworthy. So here's the lesson. When I worked back in the 90s, I worked at a cryptographic company, and we dealt with what was called the cipher war, the cryptographic wars. And at that time, the government tried to do the same thing that Microsoft was doing with their UEFI secure boot. They wanted to deploy a solution called the Clipper chip. The Clipper chip was going to be installed in phones, computers, laptops, you name it. Maybe someday your future refrigerator that's connected to your Wi-Fi network. And that Clipper chip was going to provide the encryption, strong encryption, for all the devices that used the Clipper chip. And of course, everything was going to use the Clipper chip, right? Because the government was going to dictate it. The government was going to maintain an archive of all of the keys for all these Clipper chips, so that if they needed to, in the event of course, child porn, of course, all laws on the internet are breached, or all things on the internet are concerned with child porn, of which, of course, is a real thing. We should not make light of it. However, it's always the justification and the excuse as to why they should have keys to your data. They were going to use those keys and be able to do an investigation when they needed to because they had them. Well, since we just saw what happened with Microsoft and the UEFI Secure Boot, you could never trust the reality of those keys not either A, being leaked by accident, B, hacked into and stolen intentionally. I mean, the government's security has been proven to be not phenomenal, right? Or abused by people who shouldn't be abusing it. You know, you hear about these people that work at the DMV, or the MVD, or whatever your motor vehicular department is in your state, and they have this access to all this interesting data about people, and it's hard to not want to look at that. Well, that's just human nature. If those types of cryptographic keys are stored in a hierarchical way and put in some vault that certain types of government officials can get to, um, it's pretty much a given that someone's going to abuse that at some point or another. So the point I'm getting to with this is this. If you believe in your privacy and your digital rights and digital security, you have to maintain the keys. They have to be in your possession, no one else's. There can't be additional decryption keys, there cannot be backdoors, and there can't be skeleton keys to get into that data. If there are, the solution is not in your interest, it is in someone else's interest. So please, when you look at what's going on with digital security and digital rights, keep that in mind. Let's move into firearms. I know that right now smart guns are not a thing. We don't really have smart guns yet. We've seen some real preemptive attempts. Colt has done some stuff with smart guns. There's been some guys experimenting with it. And I'm going to say right here, and this is going to be controversial, the idea of a smart gun, if it were to work with the reliability required to make it effective, is not a terrible idea. There are practical applications of the modernization of weapons we use to defend ourselves that make sense if done in the right way. Let me give some examples where it makes sense, and let's just run with this. I realize we're not there yet, but let's say 10 years in the future, some form of smart gun technology has been developed that allows it to authenticate the user with 100% assurance, and it works 99.9% of the time. Or it works as well as a mechanical firearm would in the same circumstance, in terms of when you pull the trigger, it goes bang. Okay, let's just step off on that premise. If that's the case, there are good reasons to have this. A gun is stolen, the people can't use it. If a cop is in a fight in the street, an honest cop is legitimately enforcing an honest law and protecting people, and his gun is taken away from him, he can't be shot with his own gun. A concealed weapons permit carrier, just a civilian like you or I that has the permit to have the gun or is constitutional carry in a state like Arizona, the gun's taken away from him. He can't be shot with his own gun. And by the way, I've taken a class, ECQC with SouthNarc and ShivWorks, in which a gun was taken away from me and I was shot with my own gun. It's a memory I'll never forget. Anyways, that was a training class, thank goodness, not real life, but it's something you won't forget. And when circumstances like that happen, the bravado you see from a lot of internet chatter of I would never have a smart gun, or I would never let my gun get taken away from me, or I lock my gun up this way or that way, which I hope you do when you're not in possession of it. That bravado goes away real quick when you take the kind of training classes that really are revelationary to the kind of things that happen in a street fight. Again, when your sim gun is taken away from you and you're shot with it, you'll never forget it. It's a terrifying experience, and it makes you think, is there a better way? And if there was a better way with the kind of reliability in terms of smart guns in that future, I think that we should consider it. I'm not saying we should abandon all mechanical guns in the process, but we should realize that technology is moving forward and technology cuts two ways. However, if that future smart gun technology includes the concepts that were involved in the Clipper chip or the Windows UEFI Smart Boot, in which some third party organization, whether it be as a government or a corporation or some other institute, has an additional decryption key for it, or I should say an additional unlock key for it in terms of a smart gun being able to function, or they can jam the signal on that smart gun to prevent it from being usable and functional, then that's a no go, right? That's a no go, because one of the things you get with a firearm and the rights that you have with a firearm is that you are a sovereign citizen and a sovereign individual with the ability to protect yourself from whatever that threat may be. And if there's a third party that can just turn it off when they feel like it, you no longer maintain that right. So one thing to think about here is that knee-jerk reactions cause unintended consequences. So we see from a lot of people in the gun community the knee-jerk reaction that I don't want smart guns because I don't trust them. They're not viable. They'll have a kill switch, which is a possibility like we're talking about here. But then we see the government kind of reinforcing that problem with their own knee-jerk reaction in terms of places like Maryland, I believe, have made an edict that once a viable smart gun happens, therefore all other mechanical guns will become illegal to possess or at least sell further and that you have to only purchase smart guns. Well, we're not at the point where smart guns have gotten to that point of viability, and I highly doubt that the very first iteration, Gen 1, of any smart gun, and I know there's already been a few on the market, but any real iteration of that is going to be reliable enough for anyone's comfort level. And then how do we vet and ensure that that technology doesn't have backdoors in it or doesn't have a kill switch? So when the law is passed that says you must have a smart gun and only a smart gun, I understand that reaction, and it's the right reaction, is that we should not be comfortable with that law. However, that does not mean that we should be inherently opposed to the moving into the future and having inherently technologies that improve our safety and security. So this idea that that the government's going to mandate it is not reasonable either. But that fear should not prevent us from investigating a technology that may have really good positive application. So I put up an article here in which Maryland, where there was a gun dealer in Maryland that was going to sell one of the first smart guns that hit the market. It was a 22 with an RF transceiver, and he received death threats from people saying that you're going to destroy our right to keep and bear arms in Maryland because of that Maryland law. And I understand why people threatened him about that. They shouldn't be threatening him, but I understand why they were angry with this dealer, because he was the first one to break the wall in terms of putting a smart gun into the Maryland market, thereby affording Maryland the opportunity to say, okay, there's now viable smart guns. You can't buy a regular Glock 9mm anymore. Well, the problem, and while I realize he might be a spoiler, the problem isn't him, and the problem isn't the technology. The problem is that knee-jerk reaction from the government, that law that says if smart gun, then nothing else. So our ire should be placed at the legislators making that law that is not reasonable, not acceptable, just like our ire should be at the people saying that you need a clipper chip that has a backdoor to your encryption. That's not acceptable. And saying that you must have a smart gun and only a smart gun and therefore mechanical guns become illegal is not acceptable either. And that now we can't do what might have a good effect for the community and society as a whole, because we're stuck fighting between two different walls. The wall of the government, who's going to use it as a hammer to prevent us to have our rights, and the gun community, who doesn't even want the technology to be developed because they're afraid of the hammer coming from the government. So in summary, technology that you depend on for your rights, whether it's on the computer, on the internet, cryptographically speaking, or authentication, or a firearm used to defend your life and your rights, should that have to happen, only you should be in control of the technology. Anyone else means that it's of dubious value, if not worthless, or worse than worthless, dangerous, because it was put that way to prevent you from using it when you actually need it the most. I know that this is a complicated conversation, and I'm not going to go deep dive further into cryptography right now. If you guys like this kind of thing, we could do more of this. I'm keeping this at a cursory surface level, so all the viewers hopefully can understand it and enjoy it. We could go deep dive on this stuff as well. Let me know in the comments what you think. I see these worlds converging in a way that it's inevitable, so I want to do more of this because it's an important message to put out there. But guys, thank you for watching. If you like this kind of content, please consider supporting us on Patreon. If you can't support us on Patreon, totally get it. Please just share this with your friends and subscribe to both our channels on Full30 and YouTube, as well as on Facebook. Thanks again.